When an individual first awakens, whether through a moment of spiritual clarity, intellectual revelation, or deep emotional insight, there is a sudden surge of energy. The world appears different, illusions fall away, and for a time everything feels vivid, urgent, and full of meaning. However, this initial high fades quickly when that awareness is not channeled into a concrete direction. Without a definite purpose, the awakened mind begins to drift, intoxicated by its new sight, yet uncertain of its next step. Like a man who has discovered a treasure map but doesn't know where to begin digging, he stands still, overwhelmed by potential. The tragedy of awakening without purpose lies in its deceptive satisfaction. One may feel enlightened, superior even, because they now see what others don't. But this feeling is hollow unless it becomes a fuel for constructive work. The mind, once opened, begins to consume energy rapidly. If this energy is not directed into a major purpose, it dissipates. The person becomes tired, not because of hard labor, but because their thoughts swirl without focus. They ruminate, reflect, and rehearse their ideas, but take no decisive action. They confuse activity of the mind with progress of the soul. A definite purpose acts as a funnel. It narrows awareness into something actionable, something measurable. Without it, every insight becomes just another passing cloud. The awakened person notices every flaw in the system, every weakness in others, every contradiction in life. But instead of creating solutions, they drown in observation. They may even become cynical, mistaking their clarity for superiority and their stagnation for patience. They become armchair philosophers, prophets without missions, thinkers without tasks. In this state, paralysis sets in. This paralysis isn't always visible to others. On the surface, these individuals might appear calm, contemplative, or at peace. But deep inside, they feel a gnawing emptiness. It's the pain of wasted potential. They see possibilities in every direction, but can't commit to any path. The very act of choosing feels like a betrayal of the infinite. So they remain in place, paralyzed by their own expansiveness. This is the paradox. Awakening expands the mind, but without a purpose. That expansion becomes the very thing that imprisons it. The subconscious mind, once stirred by awakening, craves orders. It demands a chief aim. If none is provided, it defaults to old patterns, old fears, old limitations. Awareness alone cannot reprogram the deep machinery of habit. It merely exposes it. Unless the awakened person reclaims authority over their inner world and directs it toward a specific outcome, they will relapse into the same passive behaviors they once hoped to transcend. They will become aware of their chains, but make no effort to break them. Without purpose, time becomes the enemy. Days slip by without progress. The awakened person begins to question the point of striving. They read, they reflect, they write, they speak, but there is no unifying goal, no mission to rally around. Inspiration without application becomes torment. They long for the innocence of their unawakened days, when ignorance offered a kind of peace. Now, burdened by insight and lacking direction, they suffer under the weight of unrealized greatness. The environment of the mind, once awakened, becomes hyper, sensitive. Thoughts become louder, emotions sharper. Without a goal to contain and discipline these forces, they turn inward and cause chaos. Anxiety rises, doubt multiplies. The individual who once felt enlightened now feels lost in a storm of their own making. What was once clarity becomes confusion. They search for answers not because they lack truth, but because they lack commitment to a single, dominant purpose. This condition can deceive even the most intelligent individuals. They believe their paralysis is a noble quest for more insight, more purity, more alignment. But in reality, they are avoiding the responsibility that comes with choosing. Choosing a purpose means cutting off other possibilities. It means risking failure. It means confronting resistance. And for many, that's more frightening than remaining in the limbo of potential. So they stall, convincing themselves that they are simply preparing, when in fact they are hesitating. The longer one remains in this limbo, the harder it becomes to move forward. Momentum is lost, discipline weakens. The mind, so used to bouncing from one revelation to another, forgets how to build. The spiritual muscles atrophy. Instead of becoming a creator of reality, the person becomes a critic of it. They develop a taste for ideas, but not for execution. They applaud others who act, while hiding their own fear of failure behind complex philosophies. The awareness that once promised freedom now becomes a source of shame. This paralysis, born from unchanneled awareness, is a silent killer of dreams. It masquerades as contemplation, as depth, as wisdom. But true wisdom demands action. The mind was never meant to awaken and then stand still. It was meant to awaken and advance. Without a definite purpose, every awakened insight becomes a missed opportunity, every day a delay, and every moment an untapped miracle. There is a subtle danger in the awakening process that few recognize until it has already taken root: the illusion that one has arrived. When a person experiences a moment of great insight or personal transformation, there is a tendency to believe that the destination has been reached. This belief, though comforting, is a trap disguised as fulfillment. It whispers that the work is done, that growth has peaked, and that one can now rest on a plateau of awareness. This illusion is deadly to progress because it quietly shuts the door on hunger, curiosity, and the relentless forward drive that achievement demands. After awakening, the individual may feel as though they are no longer subject to the same rules that governed them before. They have figured it out, whatever it means in their context. They may view their former struggles as behind them, their identity now cemented in enlightenment or clarity. But this sense of having arrived causes them to stop moving. They begin to coast, believing the hard part is over. They stop setting bold goals. They stop asking better questions. They stop pressing themselves into discomfort. The fire that got them there dims because they no longer see a mountain ahead, only a view they think they've earned forever. Growth, however, is not a place one reaches. It is a state one lives in. To awaken and then assume completion is to misunderstand the nature of development entirely. True progress is infinite. No insight, no realization, no mental breakthrough exempts one from the discipline of further pursuit. Those who fall for the illusion of arrival stop doing what made them awaken in the first place. They stop reading with urgency. They stop rising early with intent. They become satisfied with their own reflection, convinced it is the final version. This comfort is seductive, and in its embrace, the muscles of ambition begin to atrophy. There is often a shift in language and attitude once this illusion sets in. Phrases like "I've done enough" or "I already know that" become common. The mind becomes more interested in validation than challenge. One begins to associate identity with awakening rather than action. Instead of proving themselves through disciplined execution, they rest on past victories. Instead of continuing to sharpen the blade, they marvel at how sharp it used to be. The sense of urgency is replaced by a quiet entitlement. The belief that wisdom is a shield that protects from the need to evolve further. Even worse, the person who believes they've arrived may begin to see others who are still striving as misguided or naive. They adopt a detached superiority, mistaking their stillness for peace, when it is often stagnation in disguise. They may mock ambition in others, claiming to have transcended it, not realizing that ambition is the very engine that transforms insight into reality. They confuse inner awareness with external mastery, and in doing so, limit the impact their awakening could have had on the world around them. The illusion of arrival is comfortable, but it is also deceptive. It creates a mental resting place where none should exist. Life is motions, psychological, spiritual, emotional, and physical. The moment one stops moving forward, one begins to decline, even if that decline is slow and invisible. There is no neutral ground in the terrain of personal growth. What looks like stillness is often decay. The awakened mind, left without challenge, becomes self-indulgent, too preoccupied with how far it's come to see how far it still must go. This illusion can be reinforced by external praise. Friends, family, or followers may applaud the progress made, feeding the ego and reinforcing the lie that arrival has occurred. But the world's applause is not a sign to stop. In fact, it is often the very moment when one must push harder, think bigger, and demand more from themselves. Settling into comfort at the first sign of recognition robs the world of the potential that deeper, more disciplined progress could unleash. It is easy to confuse approval with completion. The trap is particularly dangerous because it often begins as self-care. I need to rest becomes I deserve to stop. Rest is essential, but rest is not retirement. Rest is a tool, not a destination. When rest becomes a lifestyle justified by the illusion of arrival, the hunger that fuels greatness is lost. Momentum cools. The fire that once drove early mornings and late nights flickers. Without forward motion, even the greatest clarity will fade into complacency. Another sign of this illusion is the diminishing appetite for risk. When someone believes they've arrived, they fear losing what they've gained. They become more protective than progressive. The bold decisions that once defined their rise are replaced by cautious maintenance. Instead of aiming for the next mountain, they guard the hill they're standing on. This defensiveness is subtle but dangerous. It quietly replaces ambition with fear and evolution with maintenance. Over time, the illusion of arrival calcifies into identity. The person no longer sees themselves as a work in progress, but as a finished product. They become more concerned with preserving their image of awakened than with continuing to build a life of deeper meaning, mastery, and contribution. They stop learning, they stop stretching, they stop risking. And eventually, they stop growing. What was once a powerful awakening becomes a comfortable prison, gilded in the false security of having already arrived. The human spirit, by its very nature, craves expansion. It thrives not in safety, but in struggle. Specifically, the kind of struggle that challenges its current boundaries and demands a higher version of itself to emerge. When a person awakens and then removes all new demands from their life, they mistakenly believe that peace or contentment will naturally follow. But what follows instead is stagnation, a subtle erosion of vitality, drive, and meaning. The spirit, when left unchallenged, begins to decay from within, not out of weakness, but from lack of purpose-fueled tension. New demands serve as the sharpening stone of the self. When you are compelled to rise to a task you've never done before, or to pursue a vision that frightens you, your spirit is summoned. It becomes alert, alive, active. The mind begins to operate in new ways. Emotions deepen and strengthen. A clarity emerges because your existence is being used for something beyond the predictable. But remove those demands, and even the most awakened person slowly dulls. What once felt like profound insight begins to feel like repetition. What once felt like liberation begins to feel like routine. Most people confuse rest with renewal and comfort with fulfillment. After a breakthrough, mental, spiritual, or emotional, they often retreat, telling themselves they've earned time away from striving. And perhaps they have, But what they do not realize is that the spirit does not care for comfort over long stretches. It does not understand enough. It is engineered for upward pressure. Without that pressure, the soul feels aimless. Time drags, conversations become shallow, passions flicker and fade. What they once saw in color, they now begin to see in shades of gray. Even creativity begins to atrophy in the absence of demand. Many assume that an awakened or enlightened state will automatically produce great works, fresh ideas, or inspired solutions. But creativity does not flow freely in the absence of pressure. It flows in response to it. A writer with no deadline often writes nothing. A leader with no mission creates no movement. A thinker with no challenge produces recycled insights. The pressure to perform, to deliver, to express something meaningful into the world is not a burden to be avoided, but a catalyst to be embraced. The spirit is strengthened in the same way muscles are, through resistance, and like muscles, it does not maintain strength just because it once had it. Remove all resistance and it weakens. It forgets how to push through fatigue. It forgets how to generate energy under strain. It forgets how to focus when the weight is heavy. This is why so many people who once felt powerful, even invincible, after awakening eventually find themselves tired, disoriented, and uncertain. They removed the very forces that kept them alert and evolving. The danger is not just personal, it becomes environmental. A stagnant spirit affects the quality of one's relationships, decisions, and presence. A person without new demands stops challenging the people around them. They stop showing up with energy. They begin to coast through conversations, projects, and daily life. They no longer inspire, not because they lack depth, but because they stopped seeking more of it. Others sense the stillness, not as peace, but as dormancy. The once vibrant force begins to feel like background noise. There is also a moral erosion that sets in when the spirit is no longer tested. Integrity is forged in adversity. Courage is born in confrontation. Compassion is refined through difficult service. When life presents no fresh moral dilemmas or leadership burdens, character stops evolving. The person might still speak of values and vision, but those words become echoes of past versions of themselves, not living declarations of who they are becoming. Without new tests, even morality becomes performative rather than transformative. Without new demands, boredom disguises itself as serenity. Days blur together. Challenges are avoided under the guise of maintaining balance. The ego protects itself from failure by avoiding anything that might create discomfort. And slowly, the awakened person becomes just like the unaware person they once pity, routine, reactive, dulled by time. Their mind becomes more about preservation than progression. Their identity crystallizes into something static. They talk about who they were, not who they're becoming. It is not that people consciously choose stagnation. Rather, they unconsciously retreat from the pressure that growth requires. They rationalize the absence of challenge as maturity. They avoid new responsibilities under the illusion of self-care. They call their withdrawal simplicity, when in fact it is spiritual resignation, and yet, beneath the surface, a restless energy begins to build. It is the soul knocking on the door, asking to be used again, asking to be made useful through trial, through tension, through demand. Those who once felt alive in their journey begin to notice something is missing, not in the world, but within themselves. Their joy feels thinner, their conversations feel repetitive, their sleep, though long, is not refreshing. They have removed the friction that once brought fire. In trying to protect their awakening, they have unintentionally smothered it. For the spirit to stay sharp, it must be called into action. Without demand, it forgets its edge. Without challenge, it forgets its depth. Without a cause, it forgets its calling. There is an invisible power that shapes the destiny of every individual, whether they are aware of it or not. The power of repeated thought, directed belief, and intentional self-suggestion. Autosuggestion is not a mystical practice, but a psychological law. It is the deliberate, conscious programming of the mind through the repetition of specific affirmations, commands, and desires. At the height of motivation, when one is rising, building, and pushing forward, autosuggestion is often employed instinctively. People tell themselves they will succeed, they visualize results, they declare who they are becoming, but after awakening, many abandon this practice, believing they've outgrown the need for it. This abandonment is subtle at first. The inner dialogue that once burned with purpose begins to cool. The daily affirmations fade. The written goals go untouched. The declarations that once shaped the subconscious are replaced with passive observation. And because the awakened individual now possesses insight, they assume that insight alone will carry them. They forget that the subconscious mind does not operate on truth alone. It operates on repetition. It does not care how wise or enlightened one feels. It responds to the messages it receives over and over again. When autosuggestion is neglected, the subconscious mind reverts to its oldest programming. Doubt begins to slip in, old insecurities reawaken, limiting beliefs return, not with force, but with quiet persistence. Without new instructions, the mind falls back into familiar patterns, and because these patterns once ran deep, they re-establish themselves easily. The person may not even notice the shift at first. They simply feel less bold, less decisive, less hungry. The inner fire that once blazed with certainty becomes a flicker. It is not the world that changed. It is the absence of new internal commands. Autosuggestion is not just about motivation. It is about identity reinforcement. The mind needs to be reminded daily of who it is becoming, not just who it has been. When this daily reinforcement stops, a gap forms between awareness and action. The individual knows what they are capable of, but no longer feels aligned with it. They see their potential clearly, but cannot access the drive to realize it. Their identity begins to drift. They look in the mirror and recognize the face, but the conviction behind the eyes is gone. This disconnect deepens as each day passes without intentional mental reinforcement. There is a reason every great achiever in any field uses some form of autosuggestion. Whether through prayer, mantra, visualization, or spoken affirmation, they understand the power of impressing the subconscious mind. The awakened individual, ironically, sometimes resists these practices, viewing them as childish or unnecessary now that they understand how the mind works. But understanding without reinforcement is powerless. Knowing that you should feed the mind means nothing if you stop feeding it. The subconscious, like a furnace, only produces heat when it is fueled consistently. The abandonment of autosuggestion also weakens resilience. In the early stages of transformation, people use self-suggestion to combat fear, to build courage, to rise after setbacks. But once they believe they've arrived, they stop preparing for impact. They stop reinforcing their mental armor, so when adversity returns, and it always does, they find themselves more vulnerable than expected. Without the internal language of power, fear has more room to speak. Doubt echoes louder. The strength they once cultivated through repeated suggestion is no longer available because the habit was discarded. Many confuse clarity with conditioning. They think because they have mental clarity, they no longer need mental conditioning. But the mind, much like the body, does not maintain tone without effort. Autosuggestion is the mental equivalent of training. It is not something one graduates from. It is something one commits to for life. When the habit is lost, decline is inevitable, not in dramatic ways, but in subtle, creeping losses, less confidence, fewer bold moves, more hesitation, less joy in action. The sharpness is dulled not by trauma, but by neglect. The most dangerous part of abandoning autosuggestion is that it often feels harmless. No dramatic failure announces its absence. Life may still look orderly, tasks still get done, the outside world may not notice the shift at all. But inside, the pilot light dims. Without the daily discipline of speaking to the subconscious with precision and purpose, the inner architecture begins to weaken. You no longer walk with the same conviction. You no longer speak with the same command. And over time, you begin to question if the version of you that once burned with fire was real at all. When the mind is not given orders, it begins to wander. And the wandering mind is vulnerable to the suggestions of others, advertisers, critics, the news, fear-based narratives, memories of failure. Autosuggestion is a shield, a filter, a compass. Without it, the mind becomes reactive rather than proactive. It absorbs messages instead of projecting them. The awakened person who does not direct their thoughts intentionally becomes a victim of their environment once again, not because they lack knowledge, but because they stopped using the tool that turns knowledge into power. To abandon autosuggestion is to abandon command of one's inner world. It is to leave the gates of the mind unguarded. And no matter how advanced one believes they are, no matter how much wisdom they have gathered, no mind can remain clear, focused, and powerful without deliberate, daily reinforcement. Autosuggestion is not an entry-level practice. It is the discipline that sustains elevation. When it is lost, so too is the ability to drive oneself forward, not just with insight, but with unwavering internal alignment. The people you surround yourself with are not merely companions on your journey. They are mirrors, amplifiers, and at times brakes to your momentum. Every conversation, every interaction, and every shared belief with your circle either sharpens your edge or dulls it. After an awakening, there is often a rush of energy, a surge of ambition, a burst of clarity about what you want and who you're becoming. But if your environment, the people you keep closest, does not rise with you, your growth begins to slow, not because you lack desire, but because desire without reinforcement erodes in the company of stagnation. Momentum is a fragile force. It depends on repetition, belief, and alignment. When you're moving forward with intensity, your internal state is heavily influenced by what surrounds it. If you are immersed in a circle that encourages evolution, you keep moving. If you're surrounded by people who challenge your excuses, who stretch your thinking, who live in a state of personal growth, your standard stays high. But if those around you accept mediocrity, avoid discomfort, or dismiss ambition as foolish, you begin to recalibrate your own drive to match theirs, not consciously, but subtly, habitually, inevitably. You start to laugh at the wrong jokes, adopt the wrong timing, speak less about your dreams and more about your complaints. You begin to accept delays in your execution because no one is reminding you of your power. Your excellence begins to feel excessive, maybe even arrogant, in a crowd that celebrates minimal effort. It becomes easier to blend in than to lead. And once you stop leading yourself, your momentum collapses, not from a dramatic fall, but from a slow erosion of daily standards no longer reinforced by your tribe. Energy is contagious. Just as enthusiasm can spark vision, complacency can infect progress. Your circle teaches you what is normal. If it's normal to speak about ideas, you will think bigger. If it's normal to dwell on problems, you will start seeing more of them. If it's normal to wake early, push limits, set goals, and pursue them relentlessly, you will find that same rhythm. But if your circle glorifies distractions, mocks discipline, or excuses poor choices, your path gets heavier with each step, and your awakening becomes a memory rather than a lifestyle. The greatest danger comes from those who love you but do not understand you. They will see your awakening as confusion, your ambition as restlessness, your discipline as obsession. Out of care, they will suggest that you slow down, blend in, take it easy. They will speak the language of concern, but their words will pull you away from your edge. And because you care for them, you may listen, not because you believe them, but because resistance from those close to you is harder to ignore than resistance from strangers. Their presence, though well-intentioned, becomes friction. Your circle also sets your emotional baseline. Spend time with driven people, and discipline becomes joyful. Spend time with fearful people, and risk begins to feel dangerous. Spend time with creative minds, and your ideas will expand. Spend time with critics, and your doubt will grow. The people closest to you shape what you consider possible, what you feel worthy of, and what you allow yourself to imagine. No matter how awakened you are, the gravitational pull of your environment is relentless. If you are not actively pulled forward, you are quietly being pulled back. After awakening, your awareness becomes heightened. You see more, feel more, notice more. But if your circle remains the same, you begin to feel isolated. You start to filter your thoughts. You start to hide your excitement. You become cautious about how much of yourself to reveal. In trying not to outgrow your circle, you begin to shrink yourself. This spiritual shrinking is dangerous because it convinces you that you can stay awake while living among the asleep, without consequence. But no one maintains momentum by pretending to be less. There is no neutral energy in a relationship. Every person you speak to either moves you closer to your purpose or further from it. There are no casual connections, only accelerators and anchors. Anchors may be disguised as familiarity, loyalty, or nostalgia, but their effect is the same. They slow you down. If your vision is constantly questioned, your ambition minimized, your changes misunderstood, you are not in a supportive circle. You are in a comfortable cage, and over time, the bars of that cage become harder to see and easier to accept. True alignment comes from mutual elevation. The right circle speaks your future back to you when you forget it. They don't just support your momentum, they expand it. They challenge your limitations without insulting your spirit. They hold you accountable to your best, not out of judgment, but out of belief. When you falter, they remind you who you are. When you win, they push you to think beyond the victory. They are not impressed by potential. They expect its fulfillment. Their presence becomes a standard, not a safety net. The tragedy is not in losing momentum. The tragedy is in never realizing that your circle was its greatest influence. You may look back at a time when you felt alive, focused, driven, and not realize that the slow shift happened through conversations, relationships, and interactions that subtly normalized a lesser version of you. You did not lose momentum randomly. You absorbed the frequency of those closest to you, and unless you choose to realign your circle, that frequency will continue to shape your future, regardless of how much insight or ability you carry within you.